Coming up on WordBirds.
I think people want association, something that they know, and they kind of it, or something that makes them feel smart, right? Because people are looking for association. They want to look for something that ratifies their belief in themselves, makes them feel good, and is educational. So we did periodic table of digital identity. Now everybody who's gone to school has struggled through or enjoyed or has memories of periodic table, but it actually is something so that's so fundamental to being a student, that when we did a periodic table of digital identity, everybody technical was like, look, I really get it.
Hello and welcome to WordBirds, a birds of a feather conversation amongst people who care about words. Here we are in the Friends of the Birds season, and today on the show is Vanita Pandey. She is the CEO at CAP, a Brazilian software company in the identity management space. Today we're going to talk about how great content that no one reads needs better titles. We're going to talk about how actionable actually means making readers more successful, and a whole lot of generative AI conversation. Let's sit back and get some insight from the fly. Hello, Vanita, and welcome to the show. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
The best part about season 4 of WordBirds is that it is Friends of the Bird. It is people that I am personally friends with. I am thrilled to have you here. I've known you for a while. I know that what we're going to talk about is going to be super interesting. So let's go ahead and start with a quick fire, set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. 3 questions, quick answers. What is your best and most successful content campaign?
We did one where we kind of took concepts that people knew and created a periodic table of something, Maslow's hierarchy of something. So that was very, very successful.
Cool. What is the worst content campaign you've ever done?
We did this really deep technical content, the ultimate guides, and they didn't get as many downloads as I was expecting.
Of the two, which one taught you more?
I think the second one was definitely a lot of insights, right? We kind of went in and dug in. It made us think through is like this: if there's no download, is it because the subject line was bad, the description was bad, and the content itself was bad? How would they know that the content is bad if they haven't downloaded it? So there was like a lot of marketing, thought-provoking discussions that it led to, and we came out better across the board by analyzing that.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of B2B software companies and B2B software marketers think that technical content, based on whoever you're selling to, the persona that you're selling to, technical content's going to resonate because we're all out here trying to find the most technical content we can read. And when that content doesn't hit home, it does create an interesting question as to why don't they want to know more? Like this is an audience that cares, right? Like what did you find when you set out to diagnose the issue with that?
I think it was, I was a purist before that. I didn't like those clickbaity titles. Now I'm all for them. Like top 5 things everyone is missing. Like you would be missing out on something if you didn't do that. So I think title became a big aspect of, why would someone click on your email? Like really need to look at the metric. The other point is a technical content. If it looks like a PDF, it's there. I think the world has changed. People want to consume content differently, and they may not have the time to read the technical stuff that you've written. And so that became, one of the lessons that we got, that it has to be snackable, so to speak. And then, there's a place and time for deep technical stuff where they read about all that matters, but it just needs to be packaged a certain way.
Yeah, and just thinking about some of the things that we did in my last company that were very, very technical versus when we moved in a different direction. We were selling to at the time DevOps, and we're mobile cloud testing, and the idea was don't let bugs get you down, and the whole campaign was built around bugs, like actual bugs, and we would ship people boxes full of gummy bugs and
Okay,
plastic
okay.
bugs and the technical documentation versus the bug box did better. Like,
Exactly.
it's just that's the type of thing that drives a campaign. Um, and I think actionable also. Like, can I? Nobody's searching for your content because they want to know about your company. They're searching for answers to questions, and that snackable content that you talk about that solves the problem individually. Like, boom, I just learned something that I'm going to use tomorrow at work. Like, that's the most impactful content that we can be delivering to a technical audience. Is
Yeah.
how do I solve your problem?
And I think as you were describing, right, there's certain pieces, the bug content that you talk about was something to induce an action, whereas the detailed technical content, they are probably not as overt in what they do. Like the person who's reading it is someone who's trying to consume information. It might not result in them taking a call, but like I said, it has its place, and it kind of adds value, so to speak.
Oh, I mean, it's necessary in the funnel, especially
Yeah.
like that's helping move deals along. But the things that capture the interest at the beginning are five big things that blah blah blah, and you're
Yeah,
like, oh,
exactly.
okay.
I did want to do it. My previous company, we did bot detection. I did want to write, I like big bots and I cannot lie. And that was shut down by the team. I think that would have done well.
It would have gotten interest. The top blog article I've ever been involved with, and I would never say that I wrote it. Mace Steinberg wrote it. She was an intern at the time. Was why enterprise mobile application development is like Angry Birds. It was phenomenal. It got like a million reads. It was the most viral thing that I've ever been near. And
Yeah,
it was our intern, and she wrote this fantastic article, but it was a thing in a moment in time, and it was clickbait, and people got it. It was
yeah.
amazing. I miss content like that. That would be great.
I think it is about taking something that's happening and then tying it to something that people care about. And again, you know, yeah, I think that's something so much. I don't even know the article, but I'm going to go back and read it. Um,
Absolutely. You see
yeah,
it pass you in your email, and you're like, well, delete, delete. Okay, I'm not going to delete it. I probably won't read it right now, but I'm
yeah.
not going to delete it, and I'll
Not
come
really.
back to
Yeah,
that.
I'll
And
come back to it.
that's where
That's
the magic starts to
yeah.
happen. From your most successful campaign, what'd you learn there?
So I think people, and this goes back to your Angry Bird comment too. I think people want association, something that they know, and they kind of it, or something that makes them feel smart, right? Because people are looking for association. They want to look for something that ratifies their belief in themselves, makes them feel good, and edge is educational. So we did periodic table of digital identity. Now everybody who's gone to school has struggled through or enjoyed or has memories of periodic table, but it actually is something so that's so fundamental to being a student, that when we did a periodic table of digital identity, everybody technical was like, look, I really get it. Or we did a Maslow's hierarchy of the building blocks of fraud detection solution. Um, so again, bringing something that is has context that people understand, and then tying it back to something that they want to learn, I think it makes the consumption easy, right? So at one point in time, we were thinking about doing something around the Game of Thrones before the last two episodes really messed it up for us. But creating the House of Houses would have been a good way to do that. So I think it's just about finding relatable content and then building relatable concepts and building content around it, so people have it just doesn't sound boring and dreary old. It just is interesting and it's educational.
Well, especially when you're creating content in just a constant cycle. Like, there's always going to be something new. There's always a new demand, and you just fall into this cycle of creation.
Yeah.
Um, and how, I mean, how do you, when you look at that from a content organization standpoint, how do you come to terms with that idea of constant need? Like, where does that fall in your strategy?
The constant need to create materials and be
The
relevant.
demand and relevance and all of that.
I think that it is about, we need to kind of really understand what is it that we want to tell, what are the messages, what are the, and I think this is something that you taught me about the value drivers and building stuff around that, in one of our conversations. Like, figure out what are the value drivers that you want to communicate. How do you tie that to what your audience is looking for? And how do you constantly create materials that will help them do their job better, right? At the end of the day, I always say that we're creating enablement content. You're enabling your champion, your customer, your prospect to really be able to sell your product internally, right? And make them, be better at their job. So, sometimes looking at saying, what are the pieces of information that we can create that can help them, get promoted, help them sound better, help them have a more educated conversation with their peers. So bringing those pieces together. um, I think there's a lot of noise in the market. So, a good piece of content will stand the test of time, but I think there's so much noise that there is the need to balance volume with quantity, right? You need to keep pushing out content, but also make sure that you're not compromising on quantity, and it's not content free material that people, like, a company just push out stuff for the sake of pushing out.
Yeah. No, I think now more than ever, I mean, just the volume of content that's dripping into the marketplace because of generative AI, um, it makes standing out even more challenging, right? Because for every one article that, or every one content piece that somebody actually sits down and writes with their pen or keyboard, there's another 15 pieces of content that nobody wrote. And it's not great, but it's usable. So how do you stand out with the best content, get that best content in front of people, and make that content actionable, and drive pipeline, drive middle of the funnel progression, drive closing of deals, when your audience is being flooded with content on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece, right? It's so beautifully written. Like, the regenerative AI, it just looks like, and then you dig in and you realize that it has, content free, super adjective laden sentences that we all hate, and then it has data that you may or may not be able to validate. And I think that's where when you were talking about content governance, that becomes really important. Either using a tool or just doing it yourself to just be sure that because you want to be the trusted authority on what you're saying, right? So again, the piece is to really understand what is it that your audience needs, right? 5 slides that every CISO needs in their board deck. Like, that's very provocative, but is it educational? Is it going to help them do their stuff better? And if you can leverage generative AI to help with your content strategy, that's great. But I think making generative AI the content strategy is going to be not a long-term strategy, I think.
No, I mean, I think everybody was very concerned in the first couple of weeks that, oh my God, we're all going to go get sent home. It does not appear that we are there yet. Like, that's not where this product is. One of the things that I did last week that I thought was really cool was I taught ChatGPT about a set of value props. And then I asked it, looking at our ICP and our personas, what are the challenges that keep this persona up at night when it comes to, I don't know, content creation? And it gave me a bunch of things. And those things were interesting. And I don't think it was super subjective. It was, there were things that seemed fairly objective and usable. It also didn't look like there was room for it to have a bunch of hallucinations. I didn't ask it for data. I just asked it for some
Concepts,
thoughts.
yeah.
And then I said, based on the things that I taught you, how do we help with these challenges that are keeping people up at night? And it was able to parse through all the information that I taught it and give me talking points for each of these challenges that it identified. That's a really interesting way to create cadence emails for your BDR team. That's an interesting way to build some sales enablement, to have better conversations. But it needs, at the beginning of that, people to create the content that's going to become the derivatives. So I need to teach it. I need to tell it all this information. It doesn't know how I'm positioning, what I'm talking about, and how I want to overlay, what I would provide as fuel to overlay on top of the challenges. And even if it did think it knew, I don't I don't want it to guess, because to your point, it's just guessing. I want it to know from me. And that's where this all comes together with what's the content that makes generative AI useful. It's not Wikipedia, it's not Reddit, it's not Twitter. That doesn't make it useful, that makes it dangerous.
That's really interesting. And as you were talking, my relationship with generative AI is like that of an employee that has a lot of talent, but needs to be told exactly what's going to be done, right? So you can't
Hmm.
rely on it to do stuff. You have to constantly be, putting ideas in there. So there is that piece that's out there. I do believe that over time, if it's not already happening, just as companies have emails that come out and say, this looks spammy, this looks computer generated, right? So, and if that happens, how do you trust the data, right? So I think
Yeah.
I think going into that drug side, right? It's like uh, this is generative AI is like addiction to the phone and all of that stuff. But you just need to have some checks and balances and make sure that you're not completely relying on that. And you're, so it is a great tool. Like, the entire LinkedIn is filled with um, how can marketers leverage generative AI? Like, one of the things we're doing is we have a webinar series that's going live, that's human versus AI. So we're taking a topic and we are researching on Chat GPT and say, okay, KYC, these are the 5 things Chat GPT says we should do on KYC. And then I'm having experts agree and disagree. And you see that there is some disagreement, right? The human intuition is going to be like really key here.
Oh, absolutely. I hope so. Or else, I mean, unless I can just own all the robots and rent them out, maybe that's a thing. Um, but for right now, I definitely see a pathway for humans to continue to be a big part of this process, because computers don't know. Um,
Computers don't know, and you
they
can't
don't know.
rely on computers to know. Like that's the piece that it comes down to.
So, looking at my notes, in your pre-interview, you talked about something called the continuum of content strategy. That's a very interesting little nugget of words. What is the continuum of content strategy?
And that's something that, when I was talking to folks, there is, when you're a startup and a B2B startup, there is a journey and a growth that you go through as a marketing team, right? And your content strategy evolves and should evolve at every piece of and at every stage. So when you're early on, you just want the right content and you want to get as much content together. Maybe you want to build heft on your website, maybe you want to build SEO like content, maybe you want to just get your name out there. And your content strategy is one piece. There's no right and wrong answer. Maybe you don't have people and then you will rely more on the regenerative AI, so to speak. And then over time, you get to a place where you're now segmenting. You have products. You're like trying to go after a different customer base. You have these value drivers, and your content strategy evolves. And then you get to the next stage where now you are really well known in the marketplace, and people are coming. You are the platform of choice for people to binge on content. Then you need to have a different set of content. You may get more collaborative. You may produce more data driven content. Like one of the pieces of content that has done really well for me is a report based on the data that we see regardless of where you are, right? What are the key trends? Male in Brazil are more likely to be victims of identity fraud than women. So all of these data points that you can create becomes a content. So to me, there is a continuum, and as a marketer, we need to be aware of where you are in the journey as a B2B company, and what is the best strategy for you to get the goal, right? The goal could also be different, right? A lot of companies just want their brand out there. A lot of companies are now trying to use content to do precise demand gen campaigns. You're trying to get people to raise their hand, get a demo request. So again, that's where I talk about the continuum, and it is going to evolve. It's going to be different from month to month, right? Every quarter, you may look at a strategy and say, I need to, and as a marketer, and you know this, I'm not a traditional marketer. I didn't start my career in marketing, so sometimes I make mistakes that a regular marketer looks at and says, what are you doing? But that helps as well. But like every quarter we look at and say, listen guys, we got to just fill up the wardrobe with basic pieces of garments. We don't have, you know, a workout clothes, a whatever. So you're getting the wardrobe together. So we're just putting content and plugging gaps. And then the next quarter, you're like, I really need to refine it. I need to hone in on my style. And so just making that change and figuring out what your content strategy is going to be from time to time is the continuum. There are core values that will stay the same, but there are things that will evolve.
Interesting. You said a lot in there. There's so much that I want to dig into. But I think one of the things you talked about is like the data pieces that you're creating. And you talk specifically about facts in that data, like men are more apt to be victims of identity crime than women in Brazil. Like that to me, like that kind of content isn't just awareness content. Like, hey, we have interesting ideas. You should know us as a company. CAF is an interesting business. It's also middle of the funnel, like deal driver,
Yeah,
because you can sit down with a prospect and say, let's talk about who you do business with, and let's look at the realities of the risks that are associated with your audience. And you can see deals move forward, grow, see the average sale price go up over time as a result of that kind of content marketing. And it's a thing that I don't think a lot of content marketers think about, because we spend so much time talking about the creation of this interesting, actionable content that's going to drive awareness of the business. It's going to generate leads. It's going to get clicks. It's going to turn into webinars. We're going to use it as email content. It's all super interesting. But that piece of content is something that your seller can sit down with a prospect
yeah,
and say, like, oh, you sell to the highest risk audience that we track in our data. You're not preparing correctly. Like, this is what our product should
absolutely.
look like inside your business. And all of a sudden you go from being the folks in the business that are creating stories and colors and whatever, to the part of the business that is specifically driving the growth of your revenue. Like, that becomes really interesting.
That is spot on. And I think what it also does is, if you get a data driven report, you can do PR campaigns around it, right? So we were on TV in Brazil, talking about some of the data points, because it becomes something to pitch. It also starts to establish the company as an authority, because you have insights in the market, because you have all of these customers. And I always joke that if you torture data long enough, it'll tell you whatever you want it to hear, want to hear. So, there is value in being able to analyze the data and tell the story that is additive to the company or the strategy you want to pursue that quarter, that year.
Yep, absolutely. And speaking of things that you always say, last segment of the show, PSOTD, that is the provocative statement of the day. It's a thing that you believe that you don't think everybody believes, that you think might be controversial, and that would start a conversation with folks in the street and maybe get people angry. But I'm going to stop. What is your PSOTD?
So one of the things that people have said is the regenerative AI is going to democratize and level the playing field when it comes to content creation. I completely disagree. I think it's going to further the divide between a good content marketer and a not so good content marketer.
I like that. I think that's 100% true, because you can be that part. You could be that organization where you're like, you know what? I know how to save some money. Let's send content home, and we're just going to use this neat whiz bang tool, and we're going to create content on our own. Versus the company that doesn't send content home, that continues to create good, engaging content that drives awareness, middle of the funnel, closes deals. That is a real divide. Like,
And that
you're
does
going to
what
see a
you did. That does what, how many content creator will go in and tell ChatGPT to analyze data and then come up with it and take the value proposition? I think the same tool is going to really differentiate the lazy content writers from
absolutely
the really
write me a
brilliant.
report on this topic,
Yeah,
and go and then publish that. Like, the
yeah,
problem that I have with all of this is the promise of generative AI is that you're going to be able to create more content. Okay, I hear your value. I disagree, because, to your point, okay, let's send all those people home and let's just ask it to write a report on a topic, whatever that might be. So let's
yeah,
say I want to write a thing on content governance. It's going to be good for one, maybe 2 pieces of content that are going to be moderately effective, but only because it's using what my content writers already wrote, because I'm the only one that's writing about it. So it's using our content that's out in the world, and eventually it's going to age out of that. The other problem with it is, okay, so I can make 5 times as much, 10 times as much, 15 times as much content like this. Who's left to copy edit all this? Or are you just going to trust this thing to put it out in the world? So you're moving a problem, the writing, to a new problem, the editing of bulk content at scale,
which is going to be harder because they don't have an insight into what's being written. So
right. So I'm looking at this, and this looks plausible. It's probably true.
Yeah.
Should we run this? Sure, run it. And then you put it out in the world, and it damages your brand because it's completely dead wrong. And somebody, like, not even trying to be a jerk, just reads it and was like, oh, this isn't right. And now you're the company that's churning out misinformation into the market.
Exactly.
Like, it's not that it's not there. It's that this sort of solution doesn't work without oversight, without governance, without initial content.
Absolutely.
All of those things have to come together to make this a valuable tool. If you have source content that you have written that you trust, could you create derivatives, 5 times the number of derivatives from your source content? Yes, you can. But it had to come from you. And you also still need to read it.
Yeah. And make sure.
Because
that's
it's going to make...
And
it's going to make all these spurious connections. Like, I think this thing and this thing are on the same page. They must be the same. They're not.
And it's sourcing data, and it doesn't know whether the data source is accurate or not. And I think this is where the concept of governance is going to expand beyond just kind of, are we saying the right thing, but also, are we saying the right thing the right way? Is the source incorrect? And all of those pieces. And is it copied from somewhere else? And does it look, I mean, the fact that it could be accurate and all of that, but if people were to find out that you didn't even write it, it's, there are tools that will tell you that it's 100% AI generated. I think that's a problem as well.
Oh, we spent so much time, and you've already talked about, like, trying to write content specific to an audience. Like, I'm trying to target this directly at the people that I care about selling to. And then you tell a computer to do that. And then those people that you care about get that content and see that you don't know shit about what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, how does that benefit, like, the benefit of not writing it? Sure. But the negative of creating content that not only doesn't resonate, but turns off your target audience because of potential ignorance of the computer or whatever it could be. Like, it's not that it's not there. It's not that solution.
It's not the solution.
That's the difference. There's a lot that it can do, but it can't just be told to write content and leave it at that. No, that's not the answer.
And I thought I was very, very smart. I told ChatGPT to write a book for my 5-year-old in the tone of a kid's book that she likes. And so the first book, my kid was okay. The second, now she doesn't want to read it. Like, a 5-year-old has realized that it is boring and it's repeating the same mindless, because it's written well, right? But it's like it doesn't have the ingenuity of a human who's written the book for a 5-year-old. It's a chapter book, but I think this is one of the tests where things need to get better.
No, absolutely. It's going to use the same framework. So it's going to be the same. She's going to recognize the same story, and it changed from a princess to a prince to a cat, but it's the same story. Excellent. Vanita, I'm so glad that you were here today. This was so much fun. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to WordBirds. WordBirds is hosted by Chris Willis, produced by Charlotte Baxter Reed, and brought to you by Acrolinks. For more information on Acrolinks, visit www.acrolinks.com.